Zero apology. Did any of you notice this? Because he hasn't apologized once to the women in this. He addresses that the stories are true, although he will not acknowledge that he did it unconsensually, so he doesn't address that the stories are completely true. He says they're a little bit true, and the parts that are true is that I asked to do this, but I also had a position of power, which I'm now aware of. I'm remorseful for what I've done, but there's no, I would now like to apologize to the following people for what I did. The fact that people who were lefties were popping up in my mentions being like, Lance, I totally disagree with you on this. He's remorseful for his actions. He's made amends. What were the amends? The fact that corporations outside of him decided to make a bunch of corporate decisions because at that moment, his brand was toxic. That's a corporate decision. That's a money decision. That's why they did what they did. And that's why a couple years later, everything's starting to be okay again, because the number one example of cancel culture actually effectively making some change or working has now kind of dissipated, and lo and behold, Louis CK wins a Grammy. Yeah, I do. I want to talk about it for two reasons. One, I had a lot of pushback on Twitter, which made me think that this is clearly something that people have mixed feelings about, especially people on the left, which is a little bit unusual. And two, I did want to explore and just get on the record a little bit of what is going on and what is happening. First off, I do want to give a shout out to Amy Schumer, who says that, well, that slap really changed her life. And for some reason, at a time when she is not the center of controversy like she used to be on a regular basis, Amy Schumer used to usually be let's just say a hot topic in the minds of many. She's trying to refocus the entire conversation around her, which is unusual. Amy Schumer reveals one Oscar joke she wasn't allowed to say. Don't Look Up is the name of a movie. More like Don't Look Down, the barrel of Alex Baldwin's shotgun. I wasn't allowed to say any of that. But you can just come up and slap someone. And I guess, again, the conversation centering on the fact that words are not violence, and words do not, in fact, impact people's lives the same way physical violence does. So, you know, the sight of seeing one man slap another man on the Oscar stage was so much for her that she was certainly upset about the censoring of her own joke in relation to that. A joke related to an event that happened so recently that the family involved and many people surrounding it are most likely still kind of grieving. But either way, I still think even if I do not agree with the joke, and I think it's in poor taste, she should be allowed, of course, to make the jokes. I think you can make the jokes about anything. But I think the idea of framing it in that there is no such thing as, you know, words themselves are not violent. You cannot actually hurt someone with words. And if you do, it's only their feelings. Well, it depends. It depends if you have a, say, large platform. If you're someone like Alex Jones, who's using that platform and just using words, he wasn't using violence, he was using words, but you're effectively using those words to tell other people to use words, to go after victims of you know, horrifying events and tragedies, and that can lead to people committing suicide or things like that. Well, then yes, there is certainly an effect to be had by those words. Now, I'm not saying it's comparable, but I'm just saying the idea that, like, a comedian should be able to say whatever they want, free of consequence, and no one should ever be able to have any kind of response outside of, you know, this is a matter of freedom of speech kind of stuff. But then, speaking of consequence, Louis CK yesterday at the Grammys, a completely worthless award show that no one cares about in terms of its weight and veracity, won the best comedy album at the Grammys. And, you know, I obviously made a tweet right away where I was like, you know, I had the meme from Loki where it's like nothing has consequences kind of idea. And a lot of people were really mad. They were upset at me, and it wasn't people from the right. The people who were identifying as lefties came out and said, hey, by the way, Lance, you should be in favor of rehabilitative justice. Why is it that after all the work that Louis has done, righting his wrongs, that you would still think that it's not okay for him to continue to make millions of dollars via his career and then collect a whole bunch of awards for his incredible accomplishments? And I was a little taken aback by all this. It was confusing to me. I'll tell you why. Let's take a little step back in history and take a look at what Louis CK had done. When the premiere of Louis CK's new film, I Love You Daddy, was abruptly cancelled hours before it was set to begin, the distribution company called Orchard said that it was due to the unexpected circumstances, but some weren't surprised at all. I Love You Daddy revolves around CK playing a morally dubious TV writer whose teenage daughter starts a relationship with a man about 50 years her senior. It may not surprise you to learn that the film is something of a Woody Allen homage. Suffice to say, eyebrows were already being well and truly raised by that premise, but the other layer of skepticism surrounding this movie is rooted by the rumors of sexual harassment that have quietly dogged CK for years. Now, a little over a month after it broke the many allegations against Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, the New York Times has released a new report in which several women claim CK used his powers in the comedy world to sexually harass and intimidate them. The report details accounts of 5 women spanning from the mid-1990s to 2005. Each woman recounts startlingly similar situations in which CK, an established comedian, either asked them to watch him masturbate or forced them to do so. And this is the big part that I really want to emphasize, is the force them to do so part without their consent. Because that's the part that I think some people have either forgotten about or never learnt about. Because when people keep bringing this up, they're like, well, yeah, what he did was kind of weird. But I mean, like, if you're just going to kink shame someone who likes to masturbate in front of people, I was like, no. This is not about the kink shaming. This is about 2 things. One, him being in a position of power, him holding power over these women, the power to book them gigs, the power to get them onto TV shows, the power to give them, prestigious positions in the comedy world, or to rescind that kind of stuff. As in, you couldn't talk about this. You couldn't talk about Louis CK in the industry, let alone if you were a woman. Sorry, if you were a man. If you were a woman, like, that was beyond the pale. But if you were even a man in the comedy world, it was a big taboo to bring this up because Louis CK was so revered. He was considered like a comics comic. He had done a lot of good work in terms of like trying to promote and uplift other comics and comedians. But at the same time, there was just a big like, oh no, we don't talk about that. Similar to the kind of the Cosby situation, right? Obviously to a lesser extent for his power and prestige. In the wake of these accounts, HBO has announced CK will no longer be appearing in Jon Stewart's upcoming Night of Too Many Stars fundraising, nor will his past shows be available on HBO anymore. Netflix says it will not move forward with the next planned stand-up special. FX, which has worked with CK for 8 years, released a statement cutting ties with both him and his production company, specifically stating that he will no longer serve as the executive producer or receive compensation. The day after the report, the Orchid announced that it would be canceling the release of I Love You Daddy altogether. Now, this was pointed as the gold standard of cancel culture actually taking effect, of cancel culture, and not even something that people who are like, cancel culture is out of control would take a stance on, but that Louis C.K. did face repercussions for his actions. And they were obviously, from a corporate standpoint, a decision that a lot of these companies made very rapidly. It happened fast and furious. And at the time, everyone was like, wow, this is happening, where this is a new dawn, this is a new age. This Me Too movement has happened, it started, and we're in the middle of a new era where men will probably have to think twice about how they conduct themselves sexually. And all of a sudden, there was story after story after story that were coming out. Now, that wasn't the origins of the Me Too movement. It actually had happened long before that. But that's when we started getting this avalanche of people feeling way more confident, mostly women, feeling way more confident coming forward and telling their stories of either sexual assault, sexual abuse, and it ran the gamut. I'm sure a lot of you remember that Harvey Weinstein was obviously probably the worst perpetrator of things that were going on. And then there was a lot of individuals who were falling into what you might call a gray area, of which many people would be like, oh, I didn't even know that was that bad. Yeah, this is kind of confusing now. I mean, is there just an umbrella? Should everyone be looped into the exact same categories? Is this how we're going to discuss these things going forward? I think what was very beneficial from what came out of that, personally, was this kind of reckoning that, even though I'm not purely heterosexual, mostly heterosexual, cis men were coming to a reckoning of like, wow, maybe our conduct, which is just perfectly socially acceptable for so long, is a little yikesy, and has been yikesy for a long time. Such as, when Adrian Brody won the Academy Award for Best Actor, and he assaulted Halle Berry on stage by just running up to her without her consent and then just making out with her. Jim Carrey did the same thing to Alicia Silverstone, and when I saw him do that, I was a lad, I was a little kid, I think I was a teenager, it was a while ago. I didn't sit there thinking, whoa, I'm watching my hero, Jim Carrey, sexually assault Alicia Silverstone. I thought, whoa, that's zany Jim Carrey. There he is, being zany up there on the stage. That's kind of wild. And the problem with that being that, of course, many people who are young and impressionable, young boys too, will look to that behavior and be like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's okay if it's in service of a hilarious moment. Or maybe it's okay if it's just like one of those times where it's like, oh, well, and I can already hear the pushback coming from conservatives. All right, here's Steven Crowder's bit. I sexually assaulted my wife 3 times yesterday by slapping her on the ass. Guess you better come after me, lefties. To which I respond, no. If you are in a committed relationship with someone, especially a marriage or a situation where you live with each other, you have what you can kind of describe as a ongoing system of consent, right? There is a barrier to which both of you have kind of established that it's completely fine for your wife to walk up to you and slap your ass, or maybe grab your ass a little bit and fall into you. That's something that you probably both established either through social cues, conversations, whatever, and that is an ongoing conversation. That's very different than walking up to someone in the workplace and being like, good job, sugar tits, and then slapping them on the ass. That's you're sexually assaulting that person because there is no consent, there's no informed consent, and they haven't had a conversation about that prior to this. And therein comes the Louis CK thing, because a lot of people seem really torn about this for a number of reasons. Is it bad that Louis C.K. did what he did, even though he wasn't actually touching the women, right? Like he wasn't going up to them and grabbing them like some creepy sexual predator. He was forcing them to watch him masturbate. And I don't know why this has become kind of this really difficult gray zone for some people to process, because that's still a very bad thing and should be called out as a very bad thing. Yeah, it's not the exact same thing as Harvey Weinstein either physically raping people or Bill Cosby drugging and raping multiple women. Yes, there are a variety of degrees, and that should be discussed, that some things are worse than other things. Like we should, and most people can acknowledge that there's a huge difference between someone walking up to someone else and then giving them a slap on the ass and someone physically raping someone else. Those are different things. There are different degrees. You can still call out what Louis C.K. was doing as being horrible, though. Not even just the position of power, the fact that people were scared, the fact that people had to hide around this, the fact that it was an industry secret for so long, but he is forcing women against their will to watch him masturbate. Yes, that shouldn't be a point of like, well, it's weird, but it's not bad, is it? I mean, really. Can't the women just close their eyes, or can't they just, hang up the phone? Because one of them was a phone call where the woman was like, yeah, I only realized midway through the phone call that he was masturbating against my consent while we were in the middle of a conversation. And it's like, well, that Dave Chappelle routine where he was like, was it that bad? Could you really not help yourself? Could you not hang up the phone? And that's 100% victim blaming. It is what it is. You're blaming the victim in each one of those cases, being like, okay, sweetie, I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing what he's doing, and people probably shouldn't do that, but at the same time, you get that, like, it's probably pretty easy for you to hit one button, Not the same as having, like, Harvey Weinstein in the room forcing himself upon you. You can just hang up, right? That shouldn't be where we surround the conversation. I mean, there's a difference between telling people, hey, by the way, this individual is known to be very dangerous. I would recommend not going to his office alone, and if you do that, you may be running a risk of him potentially putting you in a situation in which you will be in harm's way. There's a difference between saying that as like, hey, I just want to help you out by warning you about this person being dangerous, and then after something bad has happened, being like, well, why did you go there? Why would you go there? Why would you do that? Why, like, do you not know any better? Why would you? Because the only person at that point who has committed a crime or done something wrong is the abuser, is the sexual abuser at that point. So you understand, big difference between being, hey, you probably shouldn't go there alone, or you probably shouldn't do X, or you probably shouldn't do Y because this person is dangerous and I know he's dangerous. And then after the fact, blaming them, being like, well, why did you do that? Why would you go there? Why would you go to his office? You've heard the rumors. He's dangerous, right? That's the one that for some reason on the internet, people seem to have a hard trouble cutting through. To most, CK is known as smart, bracing, often filthy comic, relishes making people uncomfortable, both his TV shows and his stand-up. He alternates between being the forthright guy who knows better than everyone else and the self-loathing, touch guy who realizes he knows nothing at all. His critically acclaimed shows, namely The Autobiography, blah, blah, blah. The allegations of such behavior remained rumors, whispered backstage and in comment sections. The story remained, as the Times put it, unsubstantiated, making it difficult to pin down. Every time when Louis CK was asked about such allegations directly, especially in conjunction with his own material, in which he often paints himself as a passionate masturbation enthusiast, he's been vague about how the story remained nebulous. He's never issued denials so much as he's dismissed the allegations as irrelevant distractions. I don't care about that. That's not real. If you need your public profile to be all positive, you're sick in the head. I do the work I do, and you happen to be the work after. And then eventually in his, quote, apology, which we'll get to, he issued a statement saying the stories are true. Now, many CK fans who heard about the allegations were loath to believe that a man could be so forthright about some of the hardest topics to parse comedically, could have this other side to him. 15 years after the alleged incident, after a month after the Weinstein allegations have ripped apart Hollywood, CK's accusers have found themselves in a far different environment than the one they threatened to freeze them out of comedy. Okay, Gawker confirmed. The New York Times report appears to identify the two female comics from The Blind Item as Goodman and Willow, and they said they met CK at the Aspen Festival. It started as a post-show nightcap, they say, simply became something else. He proceeds to take his clothes off, and he got completely naked, and he started masturbating. In 2015, Gawker confirmed that The Blind Item about the CK in a post detailed about how a tipster had reached out directly to CK and point-blank asked him to please stop sexually assaulting comics. CK apparently responded and asked to speak on the phone, which they briefly did. This was the whistleblower, I guess. He was lauded as a genius. He was basically a French filmmaker at this point. You know, new material every year, but he's also a known perv. And there was a lockdown on talking about him. His guy friends are standing by him, and you cannot say a bad thing about him. And I've been told by people, well, when I say it, they say it's true. If I say it, my career is over. My manager and my agent have told me that. They did threaten it. They did say, you know what, Jen, it's just not worth it. You'll be torn apart. Look at the Cosby women. And this guy didn't rape me. But he made a certain difficult decision to go on tour with him really hard because he knew if he did, I'd be getting more of the same weird treatment I'd be getting from him, and it was really fucked up, and this person was married, so it was not good, and I hold a lot of resentment. Now, why am I talking about this? Why is this important? All this kind of stuff. First thing, the accusation, because this speaks broader to rape culture and people who protect it and reinforce it. The conversation about, well, maybe the women in question are simply doing it for fame. Can you name me any of them? Can you name me a single one of Louis C.K.'s accusers? And Sarah Silverman doesn't count because that apparently was sexual. She said she found it weird that he asked her multiple times to masturbate in front of her, but she still said, okay, sure, if that's what you want to do. And that just was apparently his thing. But anyways, in terms of that, two, the situation in which people do not feel safe coming forward to talk about these kind of things out of fear of repercussions seems to be a much more prevalent theme because this was going on for a long fucking time. This went on for over a decade. Where multiple people are victims of his behavior, and at the same time were unable to speak about this and come forward about this until there was a climate where enough people were doing this and felt safe about it that the New York Times was able to attach the whole thing into a story. 3, Louis C.K. got canceled. He lost a lot of things. He lost, he has no more seasons of his TV show. Netflix canceled his special. He had a cartoon in the works that apparently got dropped. And then he went into recuse after apologizing and doing the right thing. That's the third thing that now I'm hearing today. He's been rehabilitated. If you do not believe in rehabilitation, what are you all about? Well, I was trying to find, for the life of me, his apology. Because everyone says, well, he's apologized to the women. That's the first step in rehabilitation. And then he's taken steps to right his wrongs, contribute towards the conversation, maybe even donate some money to worthy causes that deal with people who are victims of abuse. Maybe he's gone through some kind of rehab or therapy in order to help his own behavior, all that kind of stuff. This is his actual official statement that he's made. I want to address the story as told by the New York Times 5 women named Abby, Rebecca, Dana, Julia, who failed to name themselves and one who did not. These stories are true. At the time, I said to myself that what I did was okay because I never showed a woman my dick without asking first, which is also true. So right away, this is a denial of the story because there are women who accused him of doing this unconsensually, which would mean that he's not even admitting that that occurred. He's saying, well, yeah, I did this, but I asked them first. So that's not the problem, right? Here's the next part. What I learned later in life, too late, is that when you have power over another person, asking them to look at your dick isn't a question. It's a predicament for them. The power I had over these women is that they admired me, and I wielded that power irresponsibly. So this would be him speaking towards perhaps the unfair level, degrees of power, the power imbalance that we have playing it here, perhaps the parasocial relationship that someone may have formed with him, which also, yes, would have been something to call out, but is not nearly as severe or serious as you doing it without people's consent. I have been remorseful for my actions, so I feel bad. And I've tried to learn from them. and run from them. Now I'm aware to the extent of the impact of my actions. I learned yesterday the extent of which I left these women who admired me feeling badly about themselves and cautious around other men who would never put them in that position. I also took full advantage of the fact that I was widely admired in my and their community, which disabled them from sharing their story and brought up hardships to them when they tried to talk to people who look up to me and didn't want to hear it. I didn't think I was doing any of that because my position allowed me not to think about it. There is nothing about this that I forgive myself for, and I have to reconcile it with who I am, which is nothing compared to the task I left them with. I wish I had reacted to their admiration of me by being a good example to them as a man and giving them some guidance as a comedian, including because I admired their work. The hardest regret to live with is that you've done hurt to someone else, and I can hardly wrap my hand around the scope of the hurt I brought on them. I'd be remiss to exclude the hurt that I brought onto people who I work with and people and have worked with whose professional and personal lives have been impacted by all of this, including projects I'm currently in production, the cast and crew, Better Things, Baskets, The Cops, One Mississippi, and I Love You, Daddy. I deeply regret that this has brought on negative attention to my manager, Dave Becky, who only tried to mediate a situation that I caused. I brought anguish and hardship to the people at Effects who've given me so much, and the Orchid who took a chance on my movie, and everyone other entity that has bet on me through the years. I brought pain to my family, my friends, my children, and their mother. I've spent my long and lucky career talking and saying anything I want. I will now step back and take a long time to listen. Thank you for reading. Zero apology. Did any of you notice this? Because he hasn't apologized once to the women in this. I'm not making that up. Scroll through the whole thing. Yeah, that's the entirety of the statement. Here it is. He addresses that the stories are true, although he will not acknowledge that he did it unconsensually, so he doesn't address that the stories are completely true. He says they're a little bit true, and the parts that are true is that I asked to do this, but I also had a position of power, which I'm now aware of. I'm remorseful for what I've done, but there's no, I would now like to apologize to the following people for what I did. And that's not included in that. If we're going to talk about rehabilitation, that is a crucial part of that. Otherwise, this is making a mockery of the whole thing. And that's why the fact that even today, the fact that people who were lefties were popping up in my mentions being like, Lance, I totally disagree with you on this. He's remorseful for his actions. He's made amends. What were the amends? The fact that corporations outside of him decided to make a bunch of corporate decisions because at that moment, his brand was toxic. That's a corporate decision. That's a money decision. That's why they did what they did. And that's why a couple years later, everything's starting to be okay again, because the number one example of cancel culture actually effectively making some change or working has now kind of dissipated, and lo and behold, Louis CK wins a Grammy. If Louis CK donated a whole bunch of money to the victims of sexual abuse, please show it to me and tell me, and then I'll put that up, and then we can use that as like a more contribution towards this rehabilitation argument, and maybe you were telling the truth. If Louis CK has come forward and sat down with the multiple victims of his abuse in order to make a public apology directly to them, in order to explain why what he did was wrong, that's also part of rehabilitation. If Louis CK has used his voice, and the voice that he still has, a voice so powerful that it'll win the Grammy Award for Comedy Album of the Year, Comedy Special of the Year, to talk about victims of abuse, to talk about men abusing women, to talk about men forcing women to do things against their will, to talk about how people in positions of power usually use that power and abuse for sexual purposes in the case of him. Any of that. If that was the case, then yes, there has been rehabilitation. There absolutely has been rehabilitation, but there is no direct example of cancel culture now, you know, effectively destroying this man's career. Cancel culture took everything from him, everything. It was a pause. He took like a 1.5 or a 2-year pause. He got right back into it. He's doing comedy again. He's back. He's winning Grammys. You know, there you have it. Hey, by the way, I'm completely on board. The idea of rehabilitation. I think people should be, and that should be an important process of leftism. And I completely understand that. I think if you're going to point towards this as being an example of that, then you're making a mockery of the entire institution, to be totally fair with you. Unless I'm missing something, and unless there's something major that we missed here. But I think what this really comes down to is a handful of people, honestly, are kind of okay with what Louis CK did, or they don't think it's that big of a deal. And they can't really wrap their head around the entire thing, because it's like, well, I mean, he didn't actually physically grab people. He wasn't actually touching people. He was making them watch him. It's not the same. You don't understand. It's just not the same. Yes, there's a variety of degrees. There's certainly different degrees of assault. There's certainly different degrees of what is wrong. What is, like, you know, there's a big difference between, you know, what Adrian Brody did to Halle Berry and what Harvey Weinstein did. A massive one. That doesn't excuse Louis CK's actions, and it also doesn't change the fact that I don't think along the way there has been this road to rehabilitation that everyone is referencing. It's a weird hill to die on. I completely agree with that. It's a bizarre one, and I get it. It's probably because A, you like his work, or B, you don't think what he did was so bad. That's ultimately it, you know. People who can't grasp this as bad are the same people who think the only form of sex is penetration. Well, not only that, people who also think that people should have the ability to always stop the act in question, like ignore the fact that some people, when they're put in a situation that they're extremely uncomfortable with, they experience fight or flight, right? Or freeze. Like, some people will suddenly just be like, what the fuck is happening? Because it's not something they'd ever been prepared to process. And then all of a sudden they're just frozen there. And then afterwards it's like, well, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you leave the room? It's like, well, he was actually literally in front of the room masturbating. But like, okay, well then why didn't you close your eyes and look at the floor? Why didn't you hang up the phone? Why didn't you, like, all of that shit is victim blaming. Every single one of them, you know? It's classic. I don't even really like Louis' work, but I've also had friends who whip their dick out. Yeah, that's a bad thing, and you should call it out, Muggles. Don't whip your dick out in front of anybody unless it's been a consensual agreement that you have with somebody. This isn't this isn't a complicated topic. Don't do that. You're exposing yourself. I mean, if you mean someone is in a corner and was just taking a piss, and someone else is like, oh my god, his dick out. No, if you mean someone is standing in front of a group of people and is like, yo, look at my dick, well then yeah, that's not cool. Don't do that. My friend Tim whipped his dick out in my face. We laughed. Okay, cool story. That doesn't make it all right. Like, is that going to be your prescription? Because I laughed, others should be able to laugh as well. But it was funny. You don't understand. we all had a good time. Yes. Okay. Well then, yeah. I'm sorry. You're just objectively wrong then. Yeah. No. You should not just walk up to people and whip your dick out as a form of amusement for yourself or others. This is like the kind of stuff we've learned very, very early on. You know. Again, if you're saying like this is a close relationship between a handful of friends, we're all fine whipping our dicks out at each other. That's what we do. We're just a group of friends who like to whip our dicks out, and we find that funny. Then yeah, you've kind of created, you understand, the act of consent amongst yourselves. Like, you've kind of agreed amongst yourselves, we are fine in our group of friends doing this act where we show each other our dicks and laugh at our penises. That's what we do. This is how we enjoy ourselves. That's different than your friend walking up to a group of strangers and then whipping their dick out. That's different to that friend walking up to a group of people that they work with and whipping their dick out. That's different than your friend walking up to a person who they may even like and whipping their dick out. It's all very, very different situations. That goes back to my example with like why Steven Crowder will be like, hey, Raven G3226, thank you for subscribing. Steven Crowder will be like, hey, I slapped my wife on the ass yesterday. Did I just sexually assault her? And the answer is most likely no, because you and your wife have an ongoing system of consent, right? You have certain things you both agreed to. You're totally fine if she grabs her ass or he grabs her boobs or whatever, and then that's fine. There's probably a degree to which you'd probably be like, wait, well, what are you doing? Like, I don't want you to do what you're doing at this moment in time. I happen to be at the bank. But like, for the most part, you're going to understand the boundaries and what you both feel comfortable with. And you and your friends probably feel the exact same thing, right? The exact same thing. That's again, different than teaching people you shouldn't whip your dick out in front of strangers for a laugh. If you don't know the people, if you don't have like their consent, yeah, it's very easy.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback, because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we are prepared to conduct many a human sacrifices in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble yet incompetent jesters, trying in vain to bring some levity into your life. To our Lord Trevor R., we give you thanks for this meager plot of land for us to toil away our pathetic existence. To our brave knights, Carl Wauer, Tony, D.M. Rivera, Resident Scarecrow, Sir Nickus, Mayred, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruben Kelly, Brandon, Words Greenwood, Nate, Hegbert Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Jenna Tal, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojack, Saren 42, Catherine, Ramon Acosta, Nkosin, Agent NDN, Violent Orchard, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We salute our mighty heroes off to conquest some bread in some far-off land.